Okay. Hello, everyone. This is Henry Schneider, the Business Performance Podcast, and today it's my pleasure to speak with Jeff Colvin at D3 Strategies to interview him to get an idea of how he approaches improving project management. And D3 stands for Design, Development, and Delivery to Achieve Success. And he's had a long career, starting out with Stanford, and now he's kind of moved over to this program associated with Duke University. So please welcome Jeff to the podcast. Hi, Jeff. So to begin
thanks for having me, Henry. Appreciate it.
Yeah. So could you please briefly describe or tell us all about D3 Strategy, your customers, and the types of services you provide?
Well, certainly. The intent of D3 Strategy simply is to consider the design, develop, and delivery of strategic success. But the key is that strategic success for the individual, the team, and the organization. And so all three win when you align and ensure that there's a common level of intention and value for all three.
Okay, wonderful. So what is the importance of performance and quality to your clients?
Well, what's really important when you think about performance at a very general term is, number one, coming from the individual as a starting point. What is a hot button for them? What are they seeking from their daily life? And so you might ask the question to an individual, what is your personal strategy? Which is a really difficult one. It's almost as extreme as saying, what's your meaning of life? But once you can tap into that, whether it's really being a rich man or woman, whether it's being successful in business, whether it's being able to dabble in technology, understanding their drivers is really where it has to start. Then the key is collectively finding for a team how each of those key drivers can be collectively pulled together to support an overall team success. That gives a team an opportunity to leverage the strengths of the individuals and assign tasks and milestones and ultimately execute to serve the individual and therefore the team as a whole. Put this all together to fit the bigger picture. How does the organization win? Well, the teams are ultimately aligned with a strategic intent. And if those intentions are appropriate and they support the strategy to serve the organization, there's the win-win-win. So it sounds simple, but there's lots of pieces of that puzzle I'm glad to talk about. Excuse me, Jeff. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So I have a good question here for you. You know, the Project Management Institute has their PMP certification program. How is that different from what you do?
Well, let's be clear. PMP for a professional project manager is absolutely a very valuable and maybe necessary key element to execute strategy. But basically, that's about the project work, which is, again, tasks and milestones, running effective meetings, charts that help identify roles and responsibilities, all critical. But here's the missing piece. You can run an excellent project, but you could also run a project that is misaligned or misdirected in terms of strategic intent. And so, as I often say to many of my clients, you can execute yourself rapidly out of business because you're doing the wrong things, maybe for the wrong reason. So what you look at when you tie the execution of project management and the PMI and the PMP certification is to align it with strategy, to ensure that people at the project level not only execute well, but they understand how it links to a strategic intent. And that's where the balance has to be made.
Okay. So when you deliver your consulting and training, how do people get some practical experience in following what you've done or espousing here?
Well, whether, again, I'm doing workshops or training or even supporting at a consulting level, to me, it's all about the translation to value. What I mean by that is we're going to learn new things, but what's critical is that we're able to actually translate that learning into action.
Okay.
And so what I want to be able to drive customers or clients to do is to make it personalized to their world. It doesn't matter whether it worked for client A or B or for IBM or HP or Apple. It matters if it works for you So we really have to customize that level of translation. The concepts are not going to change radically, but what's important is the personalization so it becomes actionable and ultimately people hold them accountable to themselves. What I like to do is have any event have a post set of activity where there's some follow-up, there's some conscious raising, there's some review. And the important part then is to either revisit what's working and continue, or maybe more important, revisit what's working and not cancel it, but maybe tweak it or adjust it accordingly. And frankly, maybe even pick a new path. But without the follow-up, there's very little likelihood that it's actually going to be successful.
So the follow-up, is that like, what period of time are we talking about?
Well, for me, the best case scenario would be where I could actually sit with an individual face to face, and you get much more of an engagement in terms of reviewing what is working or what's not. And frankly, there's a fine line between business and management consulting and therapist. And so you want to create the trust and the confidence, and for people to realize that if they're going to change or do something difficult or challenging, they're going to have to open up. What's the fear? What's the resistance? What's not working? And to have a coach or someone who's a confidant who can really keep that as a close level of relationship is going to help that person actually improve and achieve their goals. Let me sum that up. If they achieve their goals, I often say each person is one of the key puzzle pieces, and everybody achieves their goals, the team achieves their goals, and of course the organization.
All right. So what are one or two of the biggest myths or misconceptions out there when it comes to quality business performance in terms of even managing projects?
Well, I'm not sure it's a myth, but it's a great question. I think that the misconception is that if we have clear goals and strategy, that's all we need. Mm-hmm. It's the translation that's missing. It's the adoption that's missing. Even if they're clear and understood, that doesn't mean I own them. And so you have to tap into that, if you will, connection between the individual goals and, of course, the organizational goal. And I think even more important today, frankly, millennials are, again, going to vote with their feet, as we say. They're not serving themselves. They're going to find an organization, hopefully, that does.
Yeah. Yeah, I know a lot of times even managers say, just go off and do good stuff. And that doesn't help either.
Right. And good stuff is a relative term. I may have thought it was good, and I might even thought it was absolutely supporting, but sometimes that doesn't align. And that's the big word you'll hear me say often is alignment.
So what is the number one biggest challenge you face when you go in and talk to companies to get them to embrace what you're telling them?
Yeah. I've thought a lot about that. I think the biggest challenge for me as more of a consultant and support in terms of customized workshops and training is that senior managers have actually great success behind them, but their ego might get in the way. And what I mean by that is they think they can do it themselves. They may be very expert in some other areas, but frankly, did they really have the training skills or capability to do what I do as a facilitator or a conduit, maybe the better word, catalyst, to support their vision, their goals, and their measures of success? So that's the barrier, getting past them saying, well, why do I need to pay you? That's what they're paying me for. And frankly, it's a tough challenge.
Well, and I guess you also run into people that, they are like the superheroes. They've pulled things out of the fire just through serendipity and good luck, and they can't repeat it.
So I'm sorry, repeat that. How can I address that?
I'm saying I'm certain you've encountered managers that think they're great because they've been a superhero. They've just been in the right place at the right time, and they were successful, but they don't know what they do.
Well, again, I recall the Peters principle. People get promoted to a point of incompetency, if you've ever heard that, of course. But the point here is they may have been very, very technically strong in one particular role or discipline. And in fact, I run into incredibly technically astute people. But it becomes a little different when you're suddenly managing large groups of people, and the diverse groups of people, different cultures, different age groups, etc., gender, all kinds of things could impact how they're going to actually motivate and ensure alignment for ultimate team and then organization success. So again, I think that's a challenge. People are getting smarter and more capable, but summary, training is not enough. There actually needs to be a formal vehicle to translate learning, whether it's book learning or classroom learning or university learning, into doing. And that's what I'm all about, the application and the real change.
That's a wonderful little video a couple of weeks ago on YouTube. It says, here's what happens when you deploy training to 100 new project managers and have only 3 experienced people. And it's a soccer coach with all these little kids running around the field, and the 3 coaches are just outperforming them entirely.
Exactly. And so that's why, again, it's something that you want to be seen as almost the invisible agent, if you will, between them. I really like this word catalyst I want to highlight because going back to science training from years ago, the catalyst actually creates a hopefully positive reaction to 2 reagents, putting them together. But most importantly, they don't get used up in the equation.
Yeah.
So they can actually do this again and again. And ultimately, that is a win for all parties.
Okay. So how do you get people past their fears of this? Because you're going to be moving people outside their comfort zone to try these new techniques that they're not comfortable with. How do you get over that?
Well, I think this is obviously a challenge for anyone, and they may not even admit that there's a fear. And so that's first order, is to raise the question, if not the comfort level, to open up where the anxiety or distress might be coming from. But the reality is the fears are often unfounded when they actually speak them in terms of, oh, I could get fired, or I'll be misbranded, or whatever it might be. We look for evidence. Where has that happened elsewhere in the organization or anywhere in their lives? And it's probably more, if you will, paranoia based as opposed to a real fear and likelihood. But what I would suggest then is 2 things. One, we call it simply baby steps. So let's take something that would be absolutely a minimal risk to that fear and see what happens as a test, a very small, if you will, experiment. The other might be, and this is actually even more creative, avoid the risk by allowing someone else who happens to be a risk seeker in the organization, someone more, if you will, comfortable with risk, to actually take that, if you will, idea or intention forward. So they could actually support you in your, if you will, desires or motives by actually taking the risk and putting you behind them. And so that's a little bit more challenging, but frankly, there are a lot of ways to move forward as opposed to just being stagnant.
Okay. So you mentioned before about executing yourself out of business. So could you have a story you could share about how you ran into that and how you helped the client get beyond that?
Well, again, as a consultant, you have to be creative and tap into the culture of the organization first, and of course the individuals and their own personal drivers and such. One of the companies that I really found very positive success years ago was a very large multinational company. I'll just leave the name out for the moment, but we had a 6-month project to achieve a goal of 50% cycle time reduction. And this is in a high-tech environment where time is money, and in fact, there was millions and millions of dollars at stake for every day late in terms of delivery. And so the key was primarily to align, again, everyone from the frontline operators to the engineers to the senior management. And so that was the first order of business, by actually doing analysis to show them the data and show them where the possible breakdowns and opportunities existed. The key then was to create a rally, and we had a real kickoff where the entire organization was pulled together to address this goal and to identify what would be the next steps to achieve. The implementation, which was key, was actually getting to the front line. And this is the key learning I had over 12 years doing consulting work here in Silicon Valley, was the senior managers may have the right vision and even the direction or strategy, but what they don't have is necessarily the understanding of why it's breaking down, why it's not translating. So what I learned early in a consulting role was go to the front lines, to the people who have to interpret and actually translate that through projects to tasks and milestones. And so this was a particular story about a wafer fab where, frankly, I spent most of my time in a complete what are the suits called? The clean rooms. Thank you.
Oh,
Clean room suits in the wafer fab, because that's where the action was. Talking to the operators, seeing what they were doing, interacting with them, and then feeding back information to the engineers, etc. But frankly, the engineers, the managers, and others who were not physically working in the wafer fab manufacturing environment were rarely in the fab. It's a hassle to put on a clean room suit and actually go explore. So this is where we learned where the issues were. For instance, trying to interpret the procedures to actually run the equipment. And engineers were not there, but operators had to collectively come together and try to decipher the information. To wrap all this up, it was very much hands-on, working with the people and having them identify their, if you will, challenges or concerns, and then be a conduit or a catalyst through the engineers to management to get those changes made.
okay.
Just to wrap up this short story, at the end of 6 months, we didn't hit our goal of 50%, but we did hit our goal of 49.8% of the actual cycle time reduction, which was frankly a very big win for the organization. So to me, those were very important elements that drove, my practice in terms of how I interact with the seniors all the way down to the front line.
Okay. So if you could distill this down even further, what would be the moral of the story?
The moral of the story is, again, the word alignment. And more importantly, find out how to serve each individual, which serves the team, which serves the organization. And you can go up to down, or you can go down to up. But what's important is to, again, find that connection and linkage and find a rallying point, something that gets people more excited than just coming to work every day to do their job. And I think that's makes it more enjoyable. Because, again, my classic statement is you spend most of your waking hours at work. Hopefully you're supporting some personal strategy as well as your organizational goals.
Okay. All right. So you mentioned earlier when we were setting up that one of your favorite phrases is always willing to explore. So could you expand on that?
Well, sure. I'm not advocating that for everyone. But my point here is if you don't take a step to learn more, how can you make a better decision? And so having always had this kind of entrepreneurial mindset and this bend towards what else is out there and the opportunities, ask more questions, meet more people. When something comes up of, gee, would you be interested in? My answer is yes, I'd like to explore further. And maybe it's 1 step, 2 steps, 20 steps. But it could also end after the first step when I get enough information to realize it's probably not a good fit or a likely intent to pursue, then you have to back off. But if you don't at least take the first step, there certainly won't be a second. So that's a simple way of saying, let's explore and see if it makes sense for a win-win. I'm very much into the collaboration value.
Okay, wonderful. So would you please spend a few moments telling us a bit about your backstory and what defining moment turned a light bulb on that inspired you to be such an advocate for improving the project management and the strategies?
I'm going to give you the answer to the question that I posed, and I'd like you, Henry, and anyone else to consider. What is your personal strategy? Mm-hmm. What is your meaning of life? Mm-hmm. And the fact that I do this in various teams and workshops, I have to have an answer because, frankly, I don't want to put something out that I haven't considered myself. Here's my answer. I have a very simple statement of my purpose in life, which is to create fond memories. Now, that sounds too basic, but fond memories, I don't want them to think back on. I want to create them, which means I'm always looking forward to build another adventure, experience, or value. And by the way, that's twofold. The value I want, certainly for myself, to say, wow, that was really exciting or successful or just really a new experience and exciting. But I also want to provide that for others. So when I create a fond memory in a workshop, in a client relationship, even mentoring one-on-one, and I'm doing some now, I have actually served myself because I've created a fond memory for them. And whether they remember my name or my face, it doesn't matter. But I know from my personal strategic intention that I was a catalyst in building a better person, a better relationship, a better experience for them, and hopefully a better team and a better organizational level of success. But definitely for the person. And so creating fond memories, as I sum it up, is serving me and, frankly, anyone I meet. And that's really simple, but it absolutely drives my daily work.
Okay. So how about thinking back, all the way back to as a young boy, an experience that you had maybe early on, even through college, that still influences how you approach business today?
I'm sorry, so I want to be clear. So some experiences on what now, please?
Just think about, reflect on your life. It could be any point in life, but something that you learned or some advice somebody gave you early on that still influences how you approach business today.
Okay. I think the key learning in my life has really been the intention to be a learning machine, to be open to experiencing new opportunities, to learning from people, from clients, from classes, from engagements. And so the key takeaway for me has always been keep an open mind. And as much as my paradigms and my historic experiences may create some, if you will, limited thinking, I have to be willing to stop and break that because the world is changing. And so it's a rare occasion where I stop and say, well, wait, this is the right or wrong way. More importantly, I have to say, well, let's explore some new thinking. What is driving your point of view and what am I missing? And through that approach, I'm going to obviously grow and I'm going to add more value as well. So I think that's really the key learning I've picked up.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Now, I know you've touched upon this several times here, but I want to get maybe a more focused answer is, what does success look like for Jeff Colvin and D3 Strategies?
Yeah. Again, success is almost a cliche statement. And how about this? Your success is my success. And again, let's summarize that. But what does that individual that I'm serving use to measure success? And until we've achieved that, frankly, I'm going to basically say I have not. And so whether they've gotten a promotion, whether they've got better pay, whether they've actually just had better daily experiences or enjoyment, I need to know how. And I'm very much on the goal measure standpoint to say, let's actually track that. Let's identify your baseline. Where are you today? Let's do what's necessary to change, and let's assure that you actually measure and achieve that success. And maybe realistically, we have to back off and say that goal is not realistic or it's too long term. Let's pull it in for short interval. But my success will be in the long run when people say thank you, and more importantly, over the long run, they say how it's continued to change their life. And that's the legacy for me, the fond memory.
Okay. All right, great. So now you're talking about, helping people measure their success or tracking it. So how do you help them determine what measures to look at?
Well, again, you can start with a number of different avenues, but ultimately the measure of success comes down to what the individual sees as a level of improvement. And so what we'll do is start with a baseline that often comes down to time and money, which are almost two classic levels of measure. But for an individual, maybe it's something that's a little more nebulous, quality of life or some level of ability for them to achieve some personal goals. And so what's difficult, but often a fallback approach, is coming up with the characteristics that maybe they define as successful and simply using the Likert scale 1 to 5 scoring. And say, okay, as a personal capability, how well are you doing motivating your team? And we may actually come up with a score, and then we'll look at the rationale, and then we'll do some implementation and come back and revisit that score. Why do you think it's gone from a 3 to a 4, and how are we going to get to a 5? What's important about that simple 1 to 5 scoring is it's a relative score. And so we don't have any hardline objectivity, but we can say, why do you think you've changed? And if you're not at a 5, is that worth pursuing, and how will we get there? And frankly, how do we then sustain it if you have achieved? the ultimate end of this story is how can we cross-validate? So great, you've achieved your 5 on motivating employees. Let's go talk to your employees. Let me do a little bit of confidential surveying. Well, they're giving you scores of 3, sir or ma'am. So how are we going to actually get a cross-validate?
Right.
Again, much easier to have a hard-line measure on time and money because it's much more objective. But certainly you don't want to leave out some of these subjective scores.
Yeah, you got to be really careful about what you pick as measures because you get your answer that you expect. And so, you want to set yourself up with something that's truly objective and not supportive.
And in fact, I often use what's called anchors. If you take this example of motivation, what does a 1 look like? What does a 3 look like? What does a 5 look like? If you can't answer that question, you're answering a very nebulous question of motivation. But when you put a formal behavioral anchor on it, then you can actually start to evaluate.
Yeah, because you have some people that never hit the extremes no matter what. They'll give you like a 3 no matter how well they feel.
Fair enough. And let me actually comment on that very briefly. When we do these types of scores, one thing that I want to highlight is that it's not always necessary to get to a 5. What leaders do that is most important is they find others who are 5s already, and they can surround themselves with those people and leverage other talent. And this is often missed. Leaders can't hit all avenues of that level of performance. So guess what? That's why you hire a team to support you in maybe some of your less than stellar approaches.
Uh-huh. Okay, so when people or clients come to you, what is the most important question they should be asking when they consider what you offer as a service?
Well, I'd like them to ask the question, how do I measure success? So that we can get into the discussion on how they measure success. Because too often there's a driver that may not be clearly defined. And until we both know how we will evaluate each other in terms of the support for the ultimate success, that's risky. And my intent is not to engage until we can actually hold each other accountable in terms of how we supported that goal. The other question that they should ask is, well, how? Okay, great. Now we know what it looks like. How are you going to get there? And I think they do need to know a little bit more about the process so they can be more comfortable, if not confident, that it's going to work.
Okay. And then a similar question, what's the most important thing or question they should be considering when evaluating D3 strategies against your competition?
Very good. I think there's going to be always others who are out there doing similar, if not better things. The key then is to find out what makes me different, what makes my organization more effective in terms of helping that individual, that team, that organization actually achieve their success. And this is where they can then maybe distinguish or differentiate. What I've learned over the years, and it may be important to anyone else listening to this, is most, if you will, senior executives or senior managers who hire consultants and trainers ultimately hire people they know or people that have been referenced to them. But that doesn't mean it's the right decision. So this is what's so difficult, is to have the network or the connection that opens up that opportunity. So I think what the prospective client really has to do is talk to someone who they trust so that they can get a validation of that person who knows me already. Otherwise, an unknown entity is very, very difficult, no matter what you can actually display or share with them, because they're going to go to more of a comfort zone.
Sure. Okay, so here's kind of the looming question I've had in my mind the whole time. Startups and entrepreneurs versus established companies. How do you kind of balance that? Because project management is going to be different in those two different environments.
Yeah, if I understand kind of distinguishing between the project management role in, say, startups and entrepreneurial environments versus well-established organizations, the first thing I've run into is that in startups, typically there's little time and little money. So when you're trying to support a thorough effort of creating some vehicle for success, be it new approaches and tools to adopt, a better team interaction, etc., there's often very challenge distraction of just doing their daily work to support their startup activities. And so the dedication to actually both sides, the people side and the organization side, as well as the customer and the development side, are really challenged to get them both done. And so when you work with an established organization, typically there's not as much pressure in terms of the day-to-day work environment. They're not necessarily working 80 hours a week just to try to sustain and grow a business. So there's typically also some history and experience with those people where they've been through other training and other type of educational environments, or even worked with other consultants. And so that may be a bias, good or bad, but at least they're more likely to be ready to receive some of this support, if you will, to make them successful. So I guess the real difference is the pressure on the day-to-day and the hours available, because what I think you'll find in anyone else is time now is the most precious commodity.
Oh, yeah.
No one has more time in the day than they need. So how do you trade off this, if you will, intervention, consulting, training, education, workshop, that's actually going to be a leveraged use of time? That's the biggest challenge.
Okay. And now you've worked internationally, from U.S. to Beijing to Bangalore, all around the world. Are the problems and issues different, or do you see some commonality?
Yeah, I like the question. And again, everyone's going to have maybe a different view. But for me, the common challenge around the world is something I've already started this conversation with 20, 30 minutes ago. And that is the translation of organizational strategy down to the team, and more importantly, to the individual. I'll use the word alignment again, as I told you I would. Whether you're in Bangalore or Beijing, you still would be best served if you can see how your daily work is supporting your team and your organization. And that hopefully brings a much better level of, again, personal, if you will, success, or even driver to the work environment. There are different cultures, of course, and no one's going to argue that. And so you have to appreciate there's adjustments within that model. But the core of human energy, I don't believe, is going to change. People want to feel valued. They want to feel they're contributing, and they want to feel like they're actually part of the puzzle that's going to provide personal and organizational success.
Okay, Jeff, thank you. So to kind of wrap things up, how can someone get in touch with you to learn more about D3 strategies and what you're offering as your certified PM program?
Well, let's go with that statement of I'm always willing to explore. Mm-hmm. So whether an individual wanted just to have a short conversation on a specific challenge, maybe they were exploring different consulting or training opportunities, the way they would reach me simply, again, is through my home office or cell phone, and through my email. My website I have not really used other than a legitimacy factor that I am existing. And when I have the intent and time, I want to build that up. LinkedIn, you'll find me under LinkedIn Stanford, and there's at least a blurb, which frankly the first line says, now that you're here, how can I help you? Mm-hmm. So let's end with that. I don't know if it's appropriate, Henry, but I'm glad to give you my on this podcast my phone number and email. You can let me know if you do that.
Yeah, you can do that right now if you want.
I would. Again, so please feel free. My home office, I'm in the Northern California, San Jose Bay Area. It's 408-353-2805. And my cell phone, 408-203-3998. And my email is simply based on the previous consulting company I ran called Link. It's linkjc@aol.com. Yeah. For Link Jeff Colvin at AOL.com. And I really want to thank you, Henry, for allowing me to just share some of my insights. Not sure they resonate with everyone, but I always say there's a few nuggets in there. Hopefully people can pull out some of that.
Well, Jeff, I really appreciate you taking the time today. Thank you so much for sharing all your stories and your expertise. And I'm sure this will be of interest to the viewership. Thank you.
You're quite welcome, Henry, and please feel free to keep in touch. Remember, my legacy is creating fond memories. I'm glad to help you if I can serve you in your business in the future. So thank you for that.
Okay.
Have a great day and keep in touch.